It might be February already. Oh my god, how is it February already? But we still have to take one last look back at 2020. Time for another rendition of Games Under 5 Hours, where I do exactly what it says on the tin and tell you guys about a bunch of great games you can pick up and set down again after just a weekend or a few sessions. And this time around, we've got a pretty eclectic mix, vibey experiences sitting right alongside some blood-pumping thrill fests. So let's start things off with a bang and talk about Ultrakill. Ultrakill is an incredible, glorious beast to behold. I'll admit that going in, I was worried its level of bombast might be too over the top, to the point of being utterly illegible, but I'm happy to be proven wrong in that case. Instead, what we got is an absurd adventure through the bowels of hell, a metal album romp to rival Doom featuring assassin robots, edgy cussing angels, ridiculous weapons like this hilarious handgun that lets you ricochet bullets off tossed coins, and so much blood. But even beyond the sick duds, Ultrakill is an incredibly tight mechanical construction that keeps everything that was great about 90s shooters, from the level design to the sick-ass guns to its million-mile-an-hour pace to the way it handles enemy design and lets boss monsters become standard mooks as things get harder, while also introducing all sorts of modern conveniences like being able to dash and slide all over the damn place like a hyperactive ninja. It's an excellent marriage of two eras, and there's a reason its name is always at the top of a growing list of throwback 90s shooters. Perhaps Ultrakill's coolest idea is the way it incorporates new Doom's glory kills in the form of copious blood sprays. The way it works is that as long as you're close enough to catch the hilariously over-the-top fountains of blood enemies emit when they die, you heal. It basically skips the step where you actually have to execute an enemy and just lets you heal from anything dying within 2 feet of you, which, just like the glory kills, heavily encourages you to stay in the enemy's face where it's most fun and dangerous. But I also found it hilariously abusable to just tank damage while filling an enemy full of lead point blank. I don't know, maybe that isn't so viable at higher difficulties. Of course, it's not completely perfect. There are some points where Ultrakill's obscene spectacle comes at the cost of actually fun gameplay, and I despise the game's propensity for putting me on narrow little platforms with bottomless pits underneath them. When I'm backpedaling 100 miles an hour away from a flamethrower-wielding deathbot that can kill me in under 2 seconds, I have neither the time nor inclination to watch my step. This wasn't fun in Thy Flesh Consumed, and it isn't fun here either. But these moments are relatively few and far between. Ultrakill is still technically in early access and only a third done, but what's already there is already pretty damn polished, still makes for a thoroughly satisfying few hours, and if you want, already features a fair bit of replayability. And if that isn't enough for you, you can chop till you drop in the Cyber Grind, a fun infinite horde mode complete with leaderboards that grip me for way longer than it had any right to. Already, Ultrakill would be good enough for me if it just stopped development and shipped today. Imagining the fact that there's still 2/3 of the game yet to come is just icing on the cake. Fuser. What a strange and terrible world we live in, where a critically acclaimed harmonics game goes entirely under the gaming public's radar. Y'all are sleeping on Fuser. Fuser does for DJing what Guitar Hero and Rock Band did for air guitarists years ago. It takes an incredibly complicated profession that would take years for you to master in reality, and boils it down into something accessible for the layman that can be picked up in a few hours. And if that doesn't scream my jam, I don't know what does. But Fuser is more than just Rock Band, but for DJs. While there is still a degree of technical performance involved, Fuser is less about the technical execution of learning how to pull off that sick riff in Through the Fire and Flames, and much more about the creative process. Both the wacky early hours where you slap things together to see what works, and the later ones where you're more intentionally trying to craft something inside of its boundaries. And those boundaries are surprisingly wide as well. This game goes in-depth with its mechanics, introducing faders, beat controllers, risers, multiple ways to introduce and swap out different tracks, and even tempo and key changes. I hope you took a music theory class in college, because you can put any song in any key you want, with all the consequences of doing so. But here again, Fuser is more than just the sum of its various mechanics. It's about what you do with them, and there, the sky is the limit. What counts as a campaign can more or less be completed in 5-ish hours, and if you ask me, it could stand to be even shorter, but it's more of an extended tutorial that gives you space to play with its concepts as Fuser slowly opens itself up one mechanic at a time. Instead, Fuser is very much a game that gives back whatever you put in. You can learn most of what the campaign teaches messing around in free play for an hour or two, but no matter which way you learn, once you're done doing so, you're kind of on your own, which means you can play that campaign and call it a day, or like any Harmonix game before it, dump hundreds of hours perfecting your craft, trying out the constant flood of new songs they're always adding to the game, and constantly chasing that creative high until you just cave and buy a physical DJ table. Fuser's offerings beyond its tutorial campaign are mostly multiplayer in nature, and outside of a versus battle system, they're all largely different variations on just going and messing around making cool music. You can make cool music solo in free play, you can make cool music with friends or strangers, essentially passing the mic around, or you can make cool music with a theme and compete to get the most likes. And that creative process can last as long or as little as you like. But however you decide to engage with Fuser, you do so primarily in the pursuit of creating art. Jaw-dropping art, novel, inventive art, even memey, ironic art. It doesn't matter what you decide to do in Fuser. Behind all the layers of different activities and its small mountain of different mechanics, Fuser is really just an engine for creative expression. And that means it requires a certain mindset to get anything out of it, but as a source for that pure artistic process, to feel the absolute rush of creation, Fuser does it better than almost any other game ever. Period. Once again, Harmonix has come as close as possible to capturing the fantasy of a creative field, short of becoming a real-life professional yourself. Synergia. So now that we're done having that whole big kerfuffle over Cyberpunk, how about a palate cleanser? It's not a big open-world game, it doesn't feature any cool RPG systems, and you'll never see a car glitch out and sideswipe a concrete barrier, but what it does have is a pretty solid cyberpunk story. This visual novel's got some really intricate and stunning artwork of androids that should look familiar, is primarily focused on where the line between humans and robots gets drawn, and follows this lady who's part of a sort of anti-android police force and growing increasingly disillusioned with the existing authoritarian system until she ends up falling completely outside of it. Yeah, this one owes a lot to Ghost in the Shell. It's not even being subtle about it, but wearing its influences so boldly worked out in Synergia's favor, giving it a fresh-feeling setting and art style even as it exists in an increasingly massive ocean of games aping the cyberpunk aesthetic. It's all a vehicle for a pretty straightforward Yuri romance, but the details surrounding it are what makes Synergia so engrossing. Synergia sold me with its very opening scene, where these two characters are chatting in a car, and occasionally small sound effects like turning blinkers activated or the rain hitting the car's roof colored the scene. And even with a static image on screen, I could still feel both time and the vehicle progressing, just through the soundscape alone. Most visual novels don't take this kind of time and care with such minute details. Regrettably, even the rest of Synergia lacks that level of attention to detail in the sound design, but in every other aspect, it never lets up. Art, music, world building, writing, all of these things are laid out with impeccable consideration for the little details, and it all comes together to create a solid vibe that I really enjoyed immersing myself in, even if its story wasn't something I usually go for. All of this is at least true up until the ending, where I feel Synergia's pacing stumbles a bit. The main character loses any agency and just more or less walks from scene to scene having the plot explained to them. But overall, Synergia is a wonderful game that I'd recommend even to people who don't necessarily enjoy visual novels, and I really can't overstate just how wonderful this game's atmosphere and sci-fi trappings are. Also, fair content warning, much like Ghost in the Shell before it, Synergia isn't afraid to show off a nipple or two. It's fairly tame and never really presented for titillation's sake, but all the same, if that sort of thing gives you the vapors, or you're thinking of handing it to your 7-year-old or something, there you go, you've been warned. Solitaire Conspiracy. Solitaire is a difficult game to make entertaining. It makes for a fun brain teaser for about 15 minutes, but the game's Achilles heel is its own randomness, which more often than not will leave you with a dead game within a dozen moves. When you do finally win one, it feels like you did so more through luck and brute force than skill. But here comes Solitaire Conspiracy to try to give us a fun riff on the idea, dressing itself up in cool spy duds, throwing together a relatively standard and unevenly executed spy thriller narrative to match, blowing up many of Solitaire's more irritating and restrictive rules, and throwing in extra gameplay options to try and raise the skill ceiling a little bit. And they make it like 80% of the way there. The biggest introduction is the idea of spy crews, who all have their own unique abilities that affect the board. One stacks up cards in opposite order from largest to smallest, which doesn't sound useful at first, but I swear it totally is, while another will take one stack and scatter it across the rest of the board. You can tackle Solitaire Conspiracy's story one of two ways. The intended way to play is with pre-seeded puzzles that sound cool on paper, but quickly became an exercise in frustration for me once levels got up over 100 moves to solve. Nothing was more frustrating than falling 5 moves short and having to spend another 10 minutes somehow retracing the past 100 you made. And the idea of a consistent layout of cards you have to solve like a puzzle is neat, but ends up feeling kind of pointless when you reintroduce randomness with some of the spy abilities. Thank God, then, that Solitaire Conspiracy features a free play mode you can play through the entirety of the game where it well and truly shines. You don't lose the satisfaction of feeling like you managed to solve a puzzle, but without that fussy turn counter ticking down, you won't ever have to redo the entire thing after mostly solving it, or get frustrated when RNG doesn't go your way. And thanks to the spy crews and a few rules changes, you don't ever have to suffer the usual frustrations inherent to Solitaire. There's always another move to be made, so free play mode feels less like a rigorous puzzle and more like a Rubik's Cube you can take your time putzing about with. By removing the turn counter, free play certainly isn't challenging by any means, but there's still enough resistance that it kept me feeling clever. Overall, Solitaire Conspiracy is far from my favorite Biffle short, but it is my favorite take on Solitaire. It's a solid little experience. Ratropolis. Hey, are you guys tired of me talking about deck builders yet? Ratropolis is a tower defense / deck builder mashup. The most important consequence of this union is that, like one step from Eden before it, Ratropolis runs in real time. This means matches are short. In true tower defense fashion, enemies appear at specifically timed intervals, and so a match is always just an hour long. But it also means it'll never give you a chance to sit back and strategize. When you pause the game, it won't even let you look at the cards in your hand to judge your options. Indeed, Ratropolis feels like a tower defense first. All of its basic mechanical conceits, from the periodic waves of inexorably marching damage sponges to your options for staving them off with a combination of static defenses and hordes of squishy military units, are rooted primarily in this genre with the deck builder elements thrown over the top. But once you get into Ratropolis' 6 different playable characters, you can essentially turn the dial on how much of a deck builder or tower defense you want the game to be. On one side of the spectrum, you can get the most vanilla tower defense experience possible with the Architect, building up a massive city of static defenses over time, while on the opposite side, the Scientist is primarily powered by instant spells from your deck and feels like a full-on deck builder with a few extra bells and whistles thrown in. But no matter what you pick, Ratropolis is a game about out-snowballing the competition. Last time I talked about how Monster Train is all about in-the-moment tactical options with a rather thin meta layer on top, and Ratropolis is its extreme opposite. There is only the long game here. It is a runaway train storming towards an inevitable conclusion, and every hand you draw is another shovelful of coal thrown into the engine. If that train ever stalls, that's pretty much it for you, and so the challenge is primarily based around quickly establishing a solid foundation and then racing to build upon it until you hold an utterly unassailable position. Ratropolis is certainly a game you can beat in under 5 hours, but like any other deck builder, there is a long road of unlocks and difficulty options beyond your first victory screen. And in Ratropolis' case, that road can be a bit painfully long, because unlocks are more or less doled out based on time played. You seem to get a flat experience boost for every wave you beat, waves come out at set steady intervals, and so the only way to fully unlock all of a leader's abilities is to sit and grind out 10 full hours with them. And when you have to do that 6 times, yeah, it's a bit of a mountain to climb just to have all your basic tools to work with. But thankfully, you don't have to worry too much about that, and Ratropolis is perfectly fun right out of the box. I'll probably never find the time to experience the game's full depth, but what I have gotten to play was a pretty fun and fulfilling experience, all on its own. That's all I've got for this quarterly wrap-up, but I've covered hundreds of great short games like these, so if you want more, you know where to look. And if you really want to see content like this flourish, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.